How would you read this? Among common verb-dependent words, many of them attach to the 連用形 of a verb. Besides たり, there are also these. Today, I'll walk you through the pitch accent of 連用形 when attached with these dependent words. Let's get started. Hey guys, welcome to Monochrome Japanese, a peaceful space where you can focus on your Japanese study. I'm your host, Shiho. This is the second video about pitch accent of verbs after the introduction episode. If you haven't watched it yet, I strongly recommend doing so before moving on. The previous episode on the mizenke will also be helpful for today's topic, so I recommend watching that as well. If you remember, I previously categorized verb-dependent words into 5 types based on how they interact with conjugative forms in terms of pitch accent. And we have already learned that these 3 types involved with dependent words that attach to the mizenke. The commonly used dependent words that attach to the 連用形 will involve these 3 types. And today we're going to look at them one by one. First up, the follower type. Although the previous episode did not cover this type, if you have watched the episode on noun-dependent words, this concept should already be familiar. As the name suggests, this refers to cases where the pitch accent of the dependent word follows the pitch accent of the 連用形. Typical examples are the extremely common conjunctive particle て and auxiliary verb た. Let's look at some examples. 送る is a nucleus-less group 1 verb, and its 連用形 is 送り. When attaching て and た, 即音便 occurs, so it becomes 送って and 送った. 怒る is a nucleus-bearing group 1 verb, and its 連用形 is 怒り. When attaching て and た, 即音便 also occurs, so it becomes 怒って and 怒った. You may have already noticed that the pitch of て and た follows the pitch of the last mora of the 連用形. That is why I call them the follower type. Let's also take a look at the other groups of verbs. 消える is a nucleus-less group 2 verb, and its 連用形 is 消え, becoming 消えて and 消えた. 食べる is a nucleus-bearing group 2 verb, and its 連用形 is 食べ, becoming 食べて and 食べた. する is a nucleus-less group 3 verb, and its 連用形 is し, becoming して and した. 来る is a nucleus-bearing group 3 verb, and its 連用形 is き, becoming 来て and 来た. Besides て and た, there are also these 3 commonly used follower-dependent words that attach to the 連用形. Since に also has just 1 mora, it behaves exactly the same way as て and た. For example, 本を買いに行く. 飲みに行かない? Now let's look at たら and たり. You may already hear that both of them carry an accent nucleus on た. Therefore, when they attach to a nucleus-less verb, they sound very smooth and natural. For example, 消える becomes 消えたら and 消えたり. when attaching to a nucleus-bearing verb. Although most nucleus-bearing follower-dependent words maintain their own accent nucleus, these two do not. In other words, they are pronounced low and flat. For example, 食べる becomes 食べたら and 食べたり. With this, everyone should now be able to read the phrase from the beginning of this video with the correct pitch accent. That's right. 上がったり下がったり. Because 上がる is a nucleus-less verb, and 下がる is a nucleus-bearing verb. And even though the forms are symmetrical, their pitch accent is different. These four follower-dependent words we just introduced are also explained in my short series, which you can refer to. Alright, that covers the main follower-dependent words that attach to the ren-yo-ke. Next, let's look at the agent type. In the previous episode on the mizen-ke, we introduced the concept of agent type through the pitch accent of reru, rareru, and seru, saseru. If you remember, it refers to dependent words that act on behalf of the preceding verb, reflecting whether it's nucleus-bearing or nucleus-less. In other words, if the original verb is nucleus-bearing, the accent nucleus moves into the dependent word. If it is nucleus-less, the entire form remains nucleus-less. The conjectural auxiliary verb so is a typical agent-type dependent word that attaches to the ren-yo-ke. For example, you becomes iisou, but naru becomes narisou. In addition, the auxiliary verb tai and the conjunctive particle nagara are also agent type. For example, you becomes iitai and iinagara, but naru becomes naritai and narinagara. When you hear iisou, iitai, and iinagara, you may feel something is a bit strange. Shouldn't they be pronounced as iisou, iitai, and iinagara? That intuition is fairly reasonable. This might be because all three of these dependent words carry their own accent nucleus, so native speakers tend to preserve that pitch movement, especially at the end of a sentence. As a result, regardless of whether the original verb is nucleus-bearing or not, when attached with these three dependent words, the ren-yo-ke loses its accent nucleus, and the dependent word may also retain its original accent nucleus. This is precisely the defining feature of the last type we're going to look at today, the leader type. We can say that although these three dependent words are agent type, within the gradual simplification of standard or common Japanese pitch accent, they currently fluctuate between agent type and leader type in their own ways. However, from the perspective of outcome, one thing remains unchanged. The ren-yo-ke always loses its accent nucleus. These three dependent words are also covered in my short series, which you can refer to. Finally, let's look at the leader type. We first introduced this concept in the episode on noun-dependent words through the suffix rashi. In the previous episode on the mizen-ke, we also introduced u or yo as a leader type dependent word. Earlier, we also mentioned that so, tai, and nagara sometimes also act as the leader type. So this concept should already be familiar to you. What's more, the most typical leader-type dependent word that attaches to the 連用形 must be the extremely familiar auxiliary verb ます. Although everyone already knows how the following examples are formed, I still think it's important to feel their pitch accent changes once again. Dependent words that remove the accent nucleus from all verbs and maintain their own accent nucleus are what I call the leader-type dependent words. Most Japanese learners begin studying verbs through the form of 連用形 plus ます, which is called must form in the educational grammar system. While this approach has undeniable practical value, pitch accent issues with non-predicative verb begin to surface as learners progress. So one of my purposes for creating this series is to help address this issue. Of course, ません, ました, and ましょう are also leader type. Besides the must family, the following are also common leader type dependent words that attach to the 連用形. For example, 飲む、飲みつつ、書く、書きなさい、わかる、わかりやすい、読む、読みにくい. Earlier, we discussed 対 in the agent type section and mentioned that it fluctuates between agent type and leader type. However, its following forms are leader type. Taking 飲む as an example, 飲みたかった、飲みたくて、飲みたければ. These are also explained in my short series. With this, we've completed an overview of the common dependent words that attach to the 連用形, as well as their pitch accent behaviors. Among them, the agent type and the leader type obviously have one thing in common, which we've mentioned already. Regardless of whether the original verb is nucleus bearing or not, the 連用形 becomes nucleus-less. Alright, that's all for today. Oh, one more thing. You know what? Two things. First, there is another dependent word that arguably often attaches to the 連用形, as in, 行きはするんだけど、すぐ戻るかも. That's right. The は that follows the 連用形. You probably noticed that は is pronounced low after 行き, which means it is clearly not the follower type. At the same time, since it only has one mora, it doesn't seem able to act as the agent type or the leader type either. So, what is it then? If you've watched the previous episode on the mizenke, you should already know the answer. It can only be the loner type. As for why, you can refer to this episode in my short series. Second, I'd like to remind you not to forget that the 連用形 can also be used on its own, which is the so-called 連用中止法. For example, 会場には十分な設備があり、多くの来場者に対応できる. Including the 連用形 regarding the pitch accent of conjugated forms of verbs, I've already provided a detailed explanation in the introduction episode of this series. So please refer to that as well. Alright, that's everything for today. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe to my channel and share my videos with your Japanese learner friends. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.